Welcome to another video from English Matters, and today we're looking at the poem Storm on the Island by Seamus Heaney. I apologise in advance for the sound of the rain pitter-pattering on my conservatory roof, although it probably, you could argue, provides an ideal backdrop for this poem. Ideally, as I've said before, this works if you have a copy of the poem and you annotate it as we go through it, please. That's the best way for this to work. I will be uploading loads more videos to do with the poetry, novels and plays that are studied on the current AQA syllabus, as well as Edexcel and other exam boards. So if you feel you like this content, please go and click the subscribe button now, and so you're kept up to date with anything I post. Okay, so Storm on an Island by Seamus Heaney. It's an interesting poem. If we think about the form, remember you're assessed on language, form and structure. They're your predominant, that's your predominant AO, isn't it? Well, the form, you've got like unrhymed, iambic, pentameter or blank verse. Now, this tends to mirror everyday speech. It gives it a colloquial, almost natural feel to the language. Enjambment is also used frequently, which also contributes to that as well. Sound is very important in this poem. Consonants, assonance and alliteration are all used effectively, and helps recreate in many ways in this poem. It certainly recreates the sound of the storm. A poetic voice is interesting. Whereas a poetic voice, it starts off quite resolute and determined. You know, we are prepared belies a confident, self-assured manner, before the kind of final admission of fear at the very end. It does fluctuate between, confident tone to being afraid, and the Volta, I think, for this is at the point where it says "but no." I think that's the Volta, or where the mood changes slightly. So anyway, let's go through the poem in order, or sort of as we read through it, so to speak. So we start off with the title, Storm on the Island. You'll notice that it lacks any article, indefinite or definite article. This kind of adds a tone of sort of, it's a kind of a generalization then. So it could be a storm, it could be any storm, it could be any island. So it's missing the article on the title. It's very direct, which certainly fits in with the overall tone of the poem. So let's start with the opening line of the poem. We are prepared. Wonderful phrase, belying self-confidence, being self-assured. We build our houses squat, sink walls in rock and roof them with good slate. Lots of harsh sounds there which belie and emphasize the strength, but also the hardness of rock and slate. Also, I think the end stops here, the end stops to these lines, tends to reinforce that feeling of ending, security, firmness is established in just those opening two lines. So we get the next line, the wizened earth has never troubled us. So there's an element of personification there as well, but it also makes the island seem almost quite barren. So it's never troubled us with hay, so it seems to be very unproductive in that respect. So, as you see, there are no stacks or stooks that can be lost. And we get this constant caesura, because he writes in these full sentences, which adds to the naturalness and tone used. You almost get like a half rhyme with stacks and stooks as well, which is adds a kind of a musical quality to it. Nor are there trees which might prove company. When it blows full blast, you know what I mean. Leaves and branches can raise a tragic chorus in a gale. So let's talk about those lines here. Nor are there any trees. Again, it's emphasizing how barren the place is, which might prove company. Company, there's an element of humor here, isn't there? Company meaning trees that are blown down or imposing upon their lives with sort of falling branches and leaves and things like that. When it blows full blast. Now, I love this line, the way it ends with full blast. Almost plosive repetition of the L sound. It's fabulous, and blast has an almost onomatopoeic plosive quality to emphasize the impact and power of the storm. You know what I mean. And I like that as well. It's a chatty, direct address to the reader. He speaks directly to the reader. You know what I mean. Leaves and branches can raise a tragic chorus in a gale. A tragic chorus here is used as a metaphor to describe the hullabaloo of a storm in many respects. So a tragic chorus in a Greek tragedy would often be used to explain the goings on and provide some sort of meaning to what was happening for the audience. There's no meaning here, there's nothing that needs explaining, and also the fact there is no tragic chorus, it tends to emphasize the loneliness of the islanders. The tragic chorus in a gale, I mean the gale here is almost personified as a kind of a tragic chorus, or the tragic chorus is certainly used as kind of a metaphor for the gale and the howling winds, so that you listen to the thing you fear, forgetting that it pummels your house too. Now pummels is a great word. It's a very violent verb to use. To pummel is quite effective here as well. And we get the end line, the stop at the end, the full stop. But there are no trees, and the caesura here is excellent, because the caesura slows down the pace of the line here, and it therefore forces us to focus upon the second no. But there are no trees, no natural shelter. It's emphasising the fact that perhaps they're not as protected as they think they might be. You might think the sea is company. Again, the repetition of the word company to emphasise in kind of an ironic way that there is no company. They're quite lonely in many respects, but also exploding comfortably, that wonderful oxymoron, exploding comfortably. You know, the adverb comfortably would not go with the verb to explode generally. Down on the cliffs. Now I love the sounds he uses in this line, down on the cliffs. But when the flung spray hits, the very window spits. Lots of repetition of the sibilant S to recreate the sound of the wind and the sea. And the sea is company, exploding comfortably down on the cliffs, that hard sea sound, that k sound. It almost, it's got a hard abrasive sound, almost like the sea smashing against the rocks, which is further emphasised by the ending with the S, cliffs, but no when it begins. And we get that wonderful internal rhyme as well, don't we? Hits and spits, all emphasising a kind of harshness, harsh contact. Also, I love the way you get that sort of assonant I sound, cliffs, hits, spits, and as I said, the sibilant S, all recreating the sound of the storm. Then we get interesting simile, don't we? Like a tame cat turned savage. Something that is familiar. It's almost like the sea is being described in terms of like a pet, like a tame cat turned savage. And we get that repetition of the assonant I, don't we? We just sit tight. It has a sort of a closed-in feel to it with the sound. We sit tight while the wind dives and strafes invisibly. Space is a salvo. We are bombarded with the empty air. So we're using a kind of a military metaphor there to emphasise the fact that they are being attacked. Space is a salvo where we are bombarded with the empty air. Strange, it is a huge nothing that we fear. Of course, the irony there is that it's not nothing that they fear, but what he means by that is something you cannot see, it's not tangible. The storm is invisible, which provides a contrast with the solid rock, which demonstrates that sort of self-assuredness from the beginning of the poem. Again, the tone changes slightly as the volta is at the but no, I think, where he starts to realise how the very threat of the kind of natural environment and the conditions. It's an interesting poem. I do like the use of the use of sounds. I do like the fact that he combines excellent sort of poetic technique with an overall sort of conversational, very accessible way of writing. Anyway, when I do talk about the techniques he uses, when we talk about the assonance, the alliteration, all that, I do emphasise the overall effect on the reader. As I've said before, this is important. They do not want a labelling exercise where you point things out. They do want you to explain how it's used, why it's used, what is the effect. That's how you're going to get your marks. I mean, this poem, I think, fits in quite nicely, really, what Seamus Heaney usually does. And for your context mark, there is a context mark to be had. And you can mention, of course, not only did Seamus Heaney win the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1995, but he often wrote about such themes: childhood, nature, and his homeland. So this is a poem that very much fits into his oeuvre in general. Incidentally, Seamus Heaney died fairly recently, in 2013. Another interesting sort of contextual mark you could pick up on, I mean, I've read somewhere that somebody has noted that the first words of this poem, Stormont, here. If you don't know, of course, Stormont was Northern Ireland's Parliament buildings, certainly during the Troubles. So this could effectively, you could argue, this poem hints that the storm could be about some other political disturbances that Ireland certainly had experienced in its relations with Great Britain. So in many ways you could argue that there's a food for thought, really. You could argue that the storm here is overall a kind of a metaphor for the sort of political disturbances Ireland were experiencing at the time. Interesting, that Stormont. That's certainly something worth pointing out. Certainly something that might get you some context marks as well. Anyway, thank you for watching. Please subscribe, please like, and please share this video with your fellow students. I will be uploading more and more content, and I appreciate your support. Thank you very much.